Hey, everybody. I'm excited for the conversation we're going to have today. We're going to have a conversation with an old friend of the channel, Adam B Coleman. He was on last year and we had a riveting conversation. So today we're going to talk about his latest book, The Children We Left Behind. I think it's going to be a powerful, impactful conversation, especially for a number of us who grew up in homes that did not have fathers there, who did not have fathers that were present. So I pray that this conversation is a blessing to you. So please share this, log on, make sure your friends are listening, and I think it's going to be very impactful. And before we get started, make sure that if you have a retirement portfolio and you want to find out more about incorporating gold and silver into your retirement portfolio, please always consider going to the biblical conservative.com/gold. That will be the best place to go to get information about your retirement portfolio. Adam, how you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. Yourself?
Good. Doing wonderful, doing wonderful. So I know when we spoke last that you were mentioning that you were writing this book and you kind of touched on it on our last conversation. And so it's good to
Yeah.
see that the book has been released. So before we even delve into the book and the topics, how has the book been received since you've released it?
So far, I'm getting um, bits and pieces of people who have read the book, um, and the people who have read the book have had a good amount of emotions and reactions to it. Obviously, if you're someone who is dealing with the aftermath of a selfish parent, like it very much, it very much so speaks to you. So I've mostly gotten from adults who were the children who were left behind, whether it be through neglect or some sort of abuse, um, or foster care. These are very much so real things. And even for the people who superficially understand what the book is about, they haven't read the book yet, but it allowed for them to share their story as to what they went through. Um, Someone whose work colleague told me about how he doesn't know who his father is, and his mother hasn't been very transparent about that information, and that's something as a grown man and a father today still impacts him to not know his identity. These are very real situations that a lot of Americans are dealing with, and I would go as far as to say um, throughout the Western world they're dealing with, and I think the root of it is what I'm really trying to address within the book.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I definitely want to get into it because you're right. I think we kind of gloss over it a little bit, especially as I mentioned to you before. I came from a broken home. My dad left when I was 8, and so you have that sense of abandonment. You have that sense of, was it something that you did? You don't have the father there to help guide you, especially through those teen years as a young man, to show you how to be a man, to teach you how to restrain your masculinity, how to be the right kind of masculine man, and my standpoint, have a masculinity that's based upon the word of God. And so,
Mhm.
what was it that prompted you to write this book? I know you've seen some of the impacts. I know you've been through. We're going to talk through your experiences personally, but what was it that drove you to actually sit down and put pen to paper and actually write this book?
I would say that with writing with different publications like the New York Post, um, there are many situations that become like national news stories, but there is an element that a lot of people weren't talking about that I would see, and there is an element of the family uh, and how it impacted these people. And I started noticing how a lot of the things that we see behaviorally um, as adults, right? So you see drug addiction, you see violence, criminality, you see all these different things. And it's understandable. You're like, how do we fix this? And so people just look at, well, if they're addicted to drugs, then we somehow get them sober. Or if they're homeless, we just get them a home and then they'll fix the problem. Um, when actually it's far deeper for them than just they're on the streets because they don't have a house. They're on the streets because of drugs and alcohol. And but the drugs and alcohol, it doesn't end there. Well, why are they consuming drugs and alcohol? Everybody does something for a reason. And so drugs and alcohol are used as something to take their mind off of something, right? To avoid something. And it's to avoid these memories, avoid these feelings, is to distract them. And obviously, there's a chemical element that evolves over time, especially with harder drugs and alcohol. But there's still the root of it, right? Because you can overcome these things. There's plenty of alcoholics who stop drinking and live a sober life, drug addicts who stop taking drugs, live a sober life. It's not just a matter of them stopping it. It's a matter of them changing their behavioral pattern, um, but also addressing the reason why they were taking it in the first place. And for many of these alcoholics and drug addicts, and some of these people I've known um, in my teenage years, nearly all of them were taking these drugs. I would say consistently. Sometimes kids experiment, but I would say they're taking it consistently because they're avoiding something. And 9 times out of 10, it was something that was happening at the home. Happy and healthy kids and teenagers don't consume drugs and alcohol consistently, right? They're doing it to avoid something, to take their mind off of something. And I think sometimes we forget that the kids are reacting to their environment. They're not necessarily trying to create something. They're reacting to what is going on because they don't have a lot of control when you're a minor, right? So if your parents want to move to another state, you have no control. You have to go with them, right? So you don't have a lot of say in your world. The only thing you have say over is maybe your body and your mind. And so you're trying to control your mind, and so you don't have to think about these things. You don't have to come in contact with these thoughts and memories and reconcile how you feel and all these things. Is to avoid things that are very painful. Um, so I do think that for many of these issues, it's not just like we're seeing the aftermath of like decades of traumatic events, physical, sexual abuse, abandonment, all the above, kids who are coming out of foster care, aged out of the foster care system, landing on the streets, so on and so forth. Um, I actually, in the book, I talk about Daniel Penny um, and Jordan Neely. Jordan Neely is the homeless man um, who was, held in a restrictive position. He was choked while in the subway after he was screaming and yelling in the subway. I talk about that case, but not to talk about the case, to not talk about the race and all this other stuff. That's the adult stuff. What I wanted to talk about was how did Jordan Neely get there to the point like before that? How did he get to that point before he died? And because it was such a big case, there was a lot of information that came out about his life. And you find out that he was in an abusive household with a stepfather who was physically abusive, so much so that his stepfather had murdered his mother and put her body in a suitcase and left it by a bridge in New York City. He subsequently, I believe he went to maybe some family members' homes for a little bit, but ultimately landed in the foster care system. A lot of people were trying to politicize it and racialize it and see he just likes to dance on the subways. He's Michael Jackson. Well, those images of him dancing on the subway, Michael Jackson, are often very old images. When he was like in his early 20s and maybe even before. And the reason why he started dancing in the subway is because in the foster home that he was in, they weren't feeding them. So he was dancing for money to feed himself and his foster care brother. So these are real things, and this is testimony coming from his foster brother
Right.
saying that because he was with him, right? He would dance, he would make just enough money so they can eat together. But he was primarily selfish. I'm sorry, selfless about it, right? He wanted to make sure that his younger foster brother ate.
Right.
That's why he was dancing. So you look at all these different things that happened to him, and obviously the mental health aspect, his mental health deteriorating. which makes sense because he dealt with a lot of traumatic events when he was younger and never got fully resolved, was just tossed around and thrown into a foster care system. And then when he was too old, he aged out, and guess where they often land? On the streets. And he's basically been on the streets since, dealing with all these mental issues, getting locked up, going in and out. And I talk about what he said on that subway car before he ended up passing. He says, I don't care if I go to jail. I don't care. I think he said, I don't care if I go to jail. I don't care if I die. Like he was at a that's a point of extreme hopelessness. It
Right.
doesn't matter. He's essentially saying, I don't care. I'll do what I want because it doesn't matter. If I get locked up or if I stay on the streets, it's still hell to me. It doesn't even matter. He's without hope. And children are brought into this world hopeful. And so I often look at like what beat the hope out of him. And it's just decades. For him, I think he passed when he was like 27, 28, I can't remember. But it's just decades, years of just every adult, nor nearly every important adult letting him down and ending up in the circumstance that he was in, um, where he's the guy you're supposed to avoid. He's screaming and yelling and crazy. He's violent because he hates the world because the world hates him.
Yeah, I remember reading that portion of your book that talks about that story. And you're right. A lot of people did politicize the Jordan Neely story and the Daniel Penny story because, as you know, people have agendas and they really don't want to get to the root cause of what's going on. And you're right. Some of those early pictures were of him dressing like Michael Jackson. I did not know that he was doing that to help feed himself and his foster brother. I mean, that's one of those things that you don't know about unless you really dig deep and understand. And I really think that a lot of people who are struggling because of
Mhm.
suppressed emotions and I mean going through having your father abandon you, you do suppress emotions, and people, especially young men, usually react in different ways. Either they become violent or they become very nihilistic. They don't care about life, they don't care about your life, and so that's why we have so much turmoil and things happening, especially in the inner city. A lot of young children are shooting each other and killing each other, and people react different ways. Some people
Right.
self-medicate and they end up, taking fentanyl and overdosing on things like that. And so it's sad though that unfortunately the people that have the ability to correct these things don't see the harm that they're creating, don't see the problems that they're creating for their children. And so a question I have for you is, before we get to like your personal experience, from your research, from your analysis, because I've read stories. I'm sure you've read stories, and it's weird now where I see people who are intentionally blowing up their marriages because they're not happy, not thinking about the
Right.
children, not thinking about the long term ramifications of their decisions, but are actually going about and blowing up their marriages because they're not happy. Where do you think that narcissism and things like that come from in today's modern Western world, man?
That's a good question. Where does it come from? I think it's something that's developed over the generations. I think we'll just use America, for example. America has been a very prosperous nation over the past 60, 70 years. Um, you know, we came out of the Great Depression. We've gone through a point of the boom in manufacturing and an economic upturn, the idea of a career being possible, not just for some people, but for most people, women entering the workforce. These are things that are in general are a net positive, allowing people the freedom, the choice to live the way they want to live. I'm about individualism. I'm all for that. Um, but just like anything else, you can do something that is good, but bring it too far, right? It becomes out of balance, right? You can eat healthy food, but if you eat too much healthy food, it's gluttonous, right? So you can take something that's good and poison yourself with it. I do think that we came to a point of individualism where it's what I want and everything else comes secondary. And when you're a parent, your job is to sacrifice. That's the number one thing. Your job is to sacrifice the things that you want to do personally, your selfish wants. It's to constantly sacrifice for someone who can't. Right? Your child can't go and work a job. Your child can't take care of themselves. Your child can't get in a car and drive themselves to um, to the baseball field to go play baseball or to the track field to do track. They can't do that. They're incapable of doing that. So it requires an adult to sacrifice their time to do that for them. Right. And so when you bring children into this world, your number one job is to sacrifice for them. So how does that need to sacrifice for children reconcile with a culture that has said being an individual is of the most utmost importance? And you know what? Do you, live your life, chase your dreams, and this infatuation with constantly being happy. The word is always happiness. Am I happy? I'm not happy in this marriage. I'm not this, I'm not that. Um, and when happiness is moments, right? Being content and joyful is continuous. And I think a lot of people are chasing these butterflies or chasing this moment, which with any relationship changes, right? How I feel about my wife today is different than when we first met. It's just different. And it's different because I feel a sense of responsibility than I did when we were just dating 6 months in, right? It's a different scenario. So I don't there's not going to be that same exact feeling, that same happiness and that same joy. Um, it just won't exist. So if 5 years from now, I'm like, well, when we first got together, we used to do this and I was happy. So I am no longer happy. So it must be because of this relationship. I know that there are kids here. And then that's when you have the rationalization part come in. We know, like, we're at a point now where we understand that divorce is devastating for children. We understand that. And for most of us, we understand why it's devastating for children. Maybe some don't fully understand why, but we at least know that divorce is going to more likely be devastating for children because you're splitting apart the world and their world is their parents essentially. So you're splitting apart the world, you're splitting up their time, and they don't fully understand why. Even if you explain to them, they don't understand adult relationships and adult dynamics. But you're still choosing that path. You're still making that choice. Why? Because you're in pursuit of constant happiness, which is impossible. And you're going to make rationalization points because no person wants to feel like they're the bad person. So of course you have to rationalize everything you do. And that's when you get, if I'm happy, my children will be happy, right? You want to believe that, even though it's not true. Or I know that this isn't good, but I'll throw them into therapy and they'll be fine, which we know that's not true. There's lots of people, lots of children who went into therapy, got nowhere, and guess what? They're 50 years old still with those childhood wounds, never fully resolved. And their life has been chaotic ever since. There have been some and I don't have any particular studies in mind, but I remember hearing that in some situations, children of divorce fare worse than children who grow up in single parent homes. So, you have all these different family separation dynamics that we're dealing with, and the adults are making certain choices. And single parenthood is often a choice, right? They chose to have children, especially, and I'm against abortion, but abortion does exist. If you don't want a child and you in an extreme situation, you can go get an abortion if you want, right? But they choose not to. They choose to keep the child, which is great. But their choices along the way of having sex out of marriage, never turning that relationship into some sort of marriage, how they choose a partner, all of these different things are choices along the way. And they're bringing children into the circumstance of poor choices or no sort of thought behind how they are family planning because there was no family planning. And that's why a lot of kids are just accidents and they just brought into this world because two people were just having sex, didn't use protection. All right, I guess we got to deal with it. There's no sort of consciousness to it. And what I would say is if you couldn't imagine the person that you're having sex with being the father or mother of your child, you probably shouldn't have sex with them. And if you couldn't imagine this person being the father or mother of your child, then you really shouldn't get married to them either. So like everything kind of works in that particular way and figuring out, well, what does a good father or mother look like? What kind of partner? See, these are conscious thoughts. These are things that you have to think about beforehand rather than I like the way they look and we have great sex. Then you end up in terrible
Right,
situations.
right, right. And I think part of that, I always go back to a number of things, how the destruction of the nuclear family, biblical family here in America, I truly believe it was
Mhm,
demonic, number one, because I know that's how the enemy wants to destroy the biblical values and standards, and it's passed through families first and foremost. And of course, and when you get men out of the house, then you can open up the door for all kind of chaos and destruction. But another thing too, going
right.
back to what you were saying, whenever sex has become casual, then people don't take that into consideration anymore. They don't think about, okay,
Mhm,
the after effects. People always talk about wanting to remedy the results of the action of creating a baby, but they never talk about the action itself. They always talk about, I'm pro this, I'm pro that. Well, why don't we talk about the source of that when it comes to bad choices, when it comes to behavior that create the children?
mhm,
And so you're right. Children are afterthoughts. Children are afterthoughts when people are deciding who they're going to get with. Children are afterthoughts, unfortunately, when people even get married. Some people get married, don't even want to have children. And then when they have children, they take out their frustration of having a child on the child. And so children are dealing with so many traumatic things. I mean, I know people that have gotten married because they had sex and they had a child out of wedlock. And you're right, sometimes those are not the best situations because you understand that the people are getting married for the sole purpose of the child, but they really weren't getting married for the child. They're getting married to save face with their family and with people around them. And so that's created some problems too. And so delving more into your book. So from your personal experience, now, were your parents married when they got together? Um, or were your parents married?
no,
No. Okay.
well,
Well,
to
to
actually
actually
accurately answer
accurately answer
that,
that,
my
my
mother and
mother and
father were
father were
never
never
married. My
married. My
father was
father was
always
always
married.
married.
He was
That's
just
right.
not
Just not
married to
married
my
to my
mother.
That's right. Mother. That's right. I remember you
So
told me
we
that.
were, yeah, we
Yeah,
were
we
the
were the
other
other
kids,
kids,
essentially.
essentially.
And
And
funny
funny
enough, I
enough, I
found
found
out while writing this book, my father never had children with
children
his
with his
wife,
wife,
which
which
I
I
didn't know.
didn't
I
know.
thought
I
he
thought he
did.
did. Wow, wow, wow. So it was you and your older sister, right? That was
Correct.
correct. Yeah. So how was that dynamic? I mean, I know we talked about it when you were on previously, but how was that dynamic knowing that that was your father, but your father didn't want to essentially recognize, did he treat your sister the same way as he treated you?
That's a good
That's a good
question.
question.
I've
I've
this book and during the process of writing this book has for like the first time opened up opportunities to talk to my mother and my sister about these very things. And essentially, my sister said, I had the same father as you. And maybe from my perspective, it seemed like there was a little bit more. And it's possible only from the fact, two reasons. My sister's older. So she's 4 years older than me. And before we left Detroit, which is where I was born, so she had more years with him because he would come around, right? He wasn't, obviously, he was married, but he would pop in and pop out. So she has more memories of him than I do. I don't remember a whole lot from when I lived in Detroit because we left when I was, I think it was like 5 going on to being 6. So my memories of Detroit or him being there are very, very few. And it's not like he lived there or anything like that where I saw him every day. So there was no real bond between myself and my father. I think my sister remembers more, she was around him more than I was. for a longer period of time. But when we left Detroit, we really didn't hear or see from we didn't hear from him or see him very often. Um, he might drive through because he was a tailor by trade, and he would go and get fabric and stuff like that from New York City. So he would drive from Detroit to New York, and for the most part, we lived in either New York State, like in upstate New York, or New Jersey. So he would stay with us if he did come through. But even as a kid, it felt like my father was just there to have a place to stay. He wasn't there to see his kids. Like his objective was to go to New York and do this thing. And maybe my sister might go with him because my sister was more forceful, of wanting to have a relationship and things like that. But I was more like I was always more timid when it came to my father. Um, and so unless he outright asked or encouraged me, I really didn't go. So I didn't even when he was there, I didn't spend a lot of time with him because he was preoccupied with doing other things.
Got it. Got it. Got it. So let me ask you this, because you definitely hit a point when it comes to that you were more timid towards that relationship. Can you think through examples in your childhood when you wish that you had your dad there, and like what were some of those feelings? Because I can think of examples just from personal experience. I grew up playing sports, and not having a dad there to coach you and teach you. Man, I see it with my son now. I'm always there coaching and doing things with him, and you reflect on
Mhm.
what would have been. What were some of those times when like it hit you real hard that man, I really wish I had my father here at this moment.
Two pivotal moments. I would say when I was in Boy Scouts, because Boy Scouts, especially back then, it was an organization. Obviously, and we have these local troops, but it was father and son kind of ordeal. And I was the only kid who didn't have his father there where I lived at. So while I stayed in Boy Scouts from Cub Scouts all the way to Boy Scouts, and I generally enjoyed it, but it's something that did stick out for me, and I would notice like my father was never there. I don't even know if my father knew I was in Scouts, to be honest with you. Um, and when I played Little League baseball, and especially towards like my last couple years of playing Little League baseball, um, you really start to notice like all of the fathers are either on the team coaching or they're in the stands watching. It's one or the other. And if they're in the stands or there, it's the entire family. It's the mother and the father and the brothers and sisters watching the kids on the team. And my father was never there. Once again, I don't even know if my father knew I played baseball. Um, and I didn't have a father to kind of like advocate for me. So I was always at the bottom of the lineup and I was always stuck in the outfield, which made me hate baseball even more. Because it's the worst. It's boring and you don't get a lot of chances. But I always wanted to be a pitcher, but the father who was the head coach of the team made his son the main pitcher. It's that kind of
Yeah,
political kind of situation.
yeah,
But it was those two particular moments in my life.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's true. That's true. Yeah. Oh, those kinds of things. So I know you touched on in the book, and I think we even talked about it last time. One of the major kind of impacts it had on you when you were younger is that you were kind of suicidal at one point, and you actually had to be put into an institution. Can you talk through that experience and what you learned and how that affected you growing up?
So to give a little bit of backstory, um, I was we had left Detroit. We moved to Virginia. We were in Virginia for less than a year. Then we moved to upstate New York. So in basically less than 2 years, we lived in three states. Um, and we were, when we moved to Virginia, we were staying with some family temporarily. didn't feel like we were wanted there. We eventually got our own place, and when we left Virginia, my mother was looking for help so she can go to school. Um, and we were staying with another family member, but that once again felt like we weren't wanted there, especially for me. There was an incident that happened there, and the next day, I think it was the next day, or very quickly when my mother found out. I remember getting off the bus and my mother saying, "We're going," and we didn't have any place to go, so we ended up being homeless and staying in hotel rooms um, for a little bit, and then we stayed with a lady who offered a room for us in her trailer. Um, and we stayed there. I want to say between like a month or 2 months. I can't remember exactly, but it was three of us staying in a single room within this trailer until my mother had enough money where we got an apartment. So we got our apartment. There's some stability, but I that really affected me. Um, and I basically the way it was described is that I had like a nervous breakdown. Um, so some of the things I remember, some of the things were told to me by my mother and my sister, but my sister remembers me being underneath the kitchen table and holding myself and screaming. Um, and she basically describes it as like I was having like a psychotic break. Like, um, and my mother, I told her that if she loved me, she'd help me die. Um, and this was when I was 8 years old. I remember my mother driving somewhere in upstate New York, walking into this building and not knowing where I was, and her handing me off to somebody. Um, and it took me a little bit to realize where I was, but I was basically in a mental hospital. Um, I was being admitted there, and I was in an area where it was all kids. It was like in this, it was a locked room, but it's like a massive room. Um, in that area, that's where we would have like group therapy sessions, and then in the back area where our beds were. And basically, I rarely left that room. I was in that room 99% of the time, unless it was like visiting time where we would go outside and with my mother. But um, consequently, I was there for 3 months, um, which is a long time, especially for an 8-year-old to be locked away. Um, but it's even worse because the way I describe it is like when you go to jail, you at least know how long you're going to be there for. But when you go to a mental hospital, you don't know when you're leaving. And every day you're wondering, like, is today going to be the day? And then, especially like if my mom would come to visit, which she did, she would come somewhat frequently to see me. I would think like, oh, she's here to take me home, and I would ask her, and she would have to tell me no. And it was very detrimental for me, and I would later find out, like, my mother's perspective, like, it was detrimental for her to leave her only son locked away. Um, and after coming out, um, I was different. I was more withdrawn, but I was also more, like, not very expressive. I didn't really talk about my feelings, I didn't express my feelings, I was kind of, like, mute. And that was kind of my demeanor most of my life. It's hard to tell if I'm happy, sad, or anything like that because I just learned to suppress how I felt, or at least suppress how I express my feelings. Um, and I think if I was to translate what happened, I don't think that place fixed me. I think it scared me into expressing myself because I knew that if you express the wrong feelings, you can get locked away. Um, and it's and obviously with me telling this story, I've had some people tell me, and professionals, like, yeah, they shouldn't have done that to you, right? You should have done more intensive talk therapy.
Yeah. 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 Wow. Wow. So let me ask you this. Was your dad during that time, did he even come around? Did he even try to? Okay. Okay. Wow.
No, I
No,
don't
I
even
don't
know if
even
he
know if he
was
was
if he
if he
knew.
knew. Aware.
I was
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Was even aware of that. Wow. Wow. So let me ask this that's deep, and you're right. I think a lot of people, they may not have been admitted to a institution, but they haven't felt those same feelings. They've probably had those same episodes, but they've dealt with it by themselves alone and had nobody to talk to. Was there any friends, any family that you could talk to during that time that could give some kind of assistance? Any aunts, anybody that could come in and help you all during that time?
No,
No,
only for
only
the
for the
reason that
reason
we
that we
moved
moved
around a
around a
lot.
lot. Okay.
So
So,
so
yeah.
I
So
didn't
I
have a
didn't have
lot
a
of
lot of
friends,
friends,
and
and
sometimes we were
sometimes we
away
were away
from
from
family.
family.
We
We
weren't
weren't
even that
even that
close to
close to
family at the
family at the
time.
time. Okay. Okay. Got it. Got it. Got it. Wow. Wow. So I know your father passed, and you talked about your emotions there. If your father was alive today, what would you say to him? I know you attempted, I believe, to reconcile before, but if your father was alive today, what were some of the things that you would, say to them? What was some, I'm sure you probably thought about this, because I went through this. My father, I think I told you this, my father passed away about a year and a half ago. And so before he passed away, I had a chance to kind of write a letter, not kind of, I wrote a letter to him, and said some things that needed to be said. And I said that a while back because I need to free myself, because a lot of times children who grow up without a father, we harbor those feelings, and it's kind of hard to express it to an adult. And usually it takes for that person to become adult and kind of deal with that, because I found that really helped me. It was kind of cathartic, to kind of write that out,
Yeah.
to express how I felt, and to really not even writing it from the standpoint that I wanted him to respond, but really writing it for my own benefit, because the Bible says that you have to forgive in order for God to forgive you. So I had to forgive him for that
Yeah.
abandonment, for those kinds of things. And so it was really helpful for me. So if your father was alive today, what would be some of, and maybe you did something like that, but what would be some of the things you would say to him and talk through some of those experiences that were a result of their abandonment?
So the
So the
first thing I
first
would
thing I would
say
say
is
is
I'm
I'm
not
not
um I'm not
I'm not
resentful,
resentful.
I'm
I'm
not
not
angry.
angry.
I've
I've
forgiven my
forgiven my
father
father
years
years
ago.
ago.
Um,
Um,
if I
if
had
I
the
had the
opportunity to
opportunity
ask
to
him
ask
any
him
sort of
these,
question, I would ask him about him, actually. Um, I don't feel like I need questions answered, like, why weren't you there? And I know that's a very common question to ask. But I feel like whatever his answer is not a good enough answer. So there's no point in me asking that particular question. But I do think that there's an area where I don't know who my father is. Like, that's why I have a chapter called A Biological Stranger. Like, he created me, but I know nothing about him. Nothing,
nothing,
nothing
nothing
important. Like,
important.
he's an
He's an
immigrant to
immigrant to
America.
America.
I don't
I
know
don't
his
know his
immigrant
immigrant
story.
story.
I don't
I
know
don't
his
know his
life. I
life.
don't
I
know
don't
his
know
real
his real
interests. I
interest.
don't
I
know
don't know
anything
anything.
about him. So
So
I think
I think
my
my
questions would
questions
be
would be
more
more
geared
geared
towards
towards
about
about
him.
him. Yeah, 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 yeah. And I know you mentioned that, yeah, your father was an immigrant, and I know culturally, I mean, there are some, sometimes there can be differences um, between, different cultures, different things like that. So I guess from that standpoint, culturally, is your mother immigrant, or was she here in America as well, American citizen? How did that work out?
No,
No,
she's
she's
American.
American. Okay.
Lineage is
Lineage is
American.
American.
Yeah.
Okay. 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 Yeah, because I know sometimes, I mean, and unfortunately, I know you saw this was question I want to ask you as well, because a lot of people think that this issue of childhood abandonment, of single motherhood being celebrated and championed, is just an issue within, the Black community. But as I'm sure you've probably seen and had people respond, this is probably an issue that is getting greater and greater, not just in the Black community, but in other communities. And what has been some of the responses from people that are not Black to your book, and some of the experiences they've had with this childhood abandonment?
So the vast majority of people um, that reach out to me that have a very similar story to me don't look like me, and this has been the case since I started talking about family separation and things like that years ago. Um, the first book, Black Victim and Black Victor, there are parts of it where I'm talking about family because I do think that it was kind of answering the question, what's the biggest thing affecting Black Americans? I said family separation, but I was also making a bigger point that this is a common uh, thing that we can, in a weird way, unite over, and understanding like we all have similar problems. It's not just us. Um, and here's the thing: like when we do numbers, I think it's very important that we put everything in context. So, yes, single parenthood is disproportionately higher for Black Americans. Um, we'll just use a number. Let's say 65%, 70%, right? So that is high as far as unwed single parent homes. But there are a lot less of us than the majority population. So it's a lot easier for that number to be skewed very high. Doesn't mean that there aren't cultural issues, doesn't mean any of that. There definitely is. But it also means that any sort of any sort of change can drastically change our numbers. Um, so if there's a massive economic change, or the fact that 60% of us live in 10 states, and within many of those states, we live in urban areas, and there's an economic decline, or there's drugs that enter a community. That these are real factors that can affect the family, um, and how we perceive family and change the culture because we are so isolated in very particular places. Um, but because in totality, we are a minority within this country, and we look at white Americans, we say, well, theirs is 30%. And so, we got to get our stuff together. But they are the majority population, and it is 30% of the majority population, which is a lot of people. It's a lot of people. So there are a lot of white Americans, white boys, white girls who are growing up and dealing with either single parenthood or divorce. And so that's how you get numbers like the Pew Research was showing, I think it was about 23 or 24% of Americans, um, children, are growing up in a separate home from one of their parents, from one of their biological parents, right? So this is a national issue. That 23, 24% is not Black Americans. It's all Americans, right? The Hispanic population, I believe, is the second largest population within the country, and they're not faring that much better, So they're somewhere in the range of, I think it was like 45, 50%, right? And their population is much bigger than Black Americans. So that's why I think if we if we want to be real here, we're talking about Black Americans because we're so hyperfixated on that percentage number. But I think we have to look at the totality of impact. The totality of impact is that all Americans are being greatly affected by family separation. And the majority population, so if we use white Americans and Hispanics, they are being greatly impacted as well. And I know this because I talk to them. I know this because the narrative about it's Black people need to get their stuff together and they're the only ones going through this, and this is fatherless behavior and blah, blah, blah. Well, I'm talking to these people who are saying, where I'm from, middle America, or wherever, this is what I went through. The person I told you about who doesn't even know who his father is, you would think this is some Black person on Maury who's trying to figure out who the father of the child is. No, this is a white guy, right? So this guy doesn't fit into the narrative that we're constantly told about. Like, we are the only ones who are facing this issue. And I do think that, and this isn't about like, oh, I'm Black and I just don't want Black people to be the only ones. It's not that. I care about children, period. I care about God's children, period. And I think by making this only about Black Americans, erases all these other children who need our concern too. And it makes it just about us as either a talking point, an area where we can just wag our finger, like, oh, get your stuff together, Black people, or just it's a thing that they can bring up and no one actually cares about. Or maybe some people do care, but they only focus on just us, right? There are multiple facets to it, but I do think that there are a lot of children in general in America who are greatly impacted by this, and it affects them in different ways. Like you mentioned before, their frustration in their outlet looks different depending on where they're from. So some kids, yeah, they may not get into a gang because gangs aren't really a thing that's there. But guess what? They'll shoot up a school. They'll take fentanyl, right? They'll self-medicate. Why? Because well, that's more accessible than a gang where they live at. I can't tell you like the amount of drug use that exists in upper middle class neighborhoods, right? They'll take oxy, they'll take all these different things, and it may on the surface look like everything is fine. They live in a decent house, and they have a nice car in the driveway that their parents drive or their parent drives. But they got a stepdaddy that molests them. They're being physically abused, and they got no one advocating for them. And all of the dirt that's happening within their home, no one even considers what might be happening because they look a particular way. And they don't, oh no, that's not them. That's over there. That's in the poor people neighborhood. That's what they do. And it's like, no, the dysfunction looks different, but the dysfunction exists. And it is multiracial. It is across economic lines. It is a greater cultural issue, and it actually goes beyond the United States. And if I could say one last thing, I know I've been talking a little bit. Um, there was one time I went to London. I got an Uber when I was in London. Get in the car with this guy, and I like to talk to the different drivers and stuff like that. I find them to be very interesting people. 9 times out of 10, especially if they're immigrants, they have very interesting perspectives and stuff. I'm talking to this guy, and he's like, "By the way, I have a full time job." I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." He's talking about that, and he said, "Yeah, I do Uber to help pay for my legal fees." Because I'm going through a separation with my wife and I'm fighting to get access to my kids. And he's essentially talking about she's weaponizing my kids against me. And he's talking about all the things that he had learned because she has these lawyers and the way the system is set up is that he's guilty until proven innocent. And if she says something, they jump immediately. But if he says actually that's not true, he has to go through all these hurdles to unravel the lies and all these different things. And you can say, all right, well, that's just him and that he's just being biased. But that's a real situation that we're talking about. And that's not an uncommon situation. I've heard that from multiple people that this is the type of legal system that they have to fight just to be involved with their kids. Nevertheless, get them for full custody, which is nearly impossible for many of them. Um, so I'm watching how family separation is affecting people, not just in America, but throughout many parts of the West. In New Zealand, I've talked to people who have dealt with this. Australia, like there are different, I would say, Western, maybe Western European um, cultures that are very similar to like the United States, who are going through something similar, where family is becoming a secondary, third priority, and the individual is always first, and the kids be damned.
Wow. I appreciate that because that kind of takes me to my next question. You kind of answered it, but I really wanted to ask you about the government's role
Mhm.
in all this. I mean, because I truly believe that you're right. I think it's the government, it's the media. People have politicized this in a way which they do everything else, not to get to the solution, but to weaponize it for their
Mhm.
own benefit. I mean, the
Right.
stories you just talked about, how I've heard stories about people who didn't want their child, this man in Texas, who didn't want their children to be, trans. But yet, because the system was set up against him, he couldn't fight for custody of his son. And he was trying to
Right.
prevent that from happening. So you hear about this all the time, but people talk about it to paint people on the right or the left as the victim or as the enemy, as the villain, but never to really hone in on the child that's being impacted. Because it's always the children that are the collateral damage, right? I mean, parents make
Right.
their decisions, but like you mentioned in your book, it's always the children that are the collateral damage of these decisions that people make. And so I wanted to touch on that. What do you think the government can or should stop doing when it comes to childhood abandonment, when it comes to the foster care system, because as you talked about this foster care system, people don't really talk about the negative impact it can potentially have on children, which is leading to this increase in overdosing with fentanyl, increase in the self medication, increase of this mental depression that people are feeling. What do you think about the government's role in all of this, and what could be done potentially from like a political standpoint or policy standpoint?
This might sound kind of weird or very libertarian, but I think the government needs to do less. I think the problem has been, and this isn't just like right versus left. I think that politicians think that they're the ones who are supposed to fix every American issue, including social issues. And when the reality is, they actually need to do less. Having the government try to dictate how we should always, like, especially when it comes to something so complicated like relationships and marriage and children. Like, for example, the Trump administration is talking about giving like this $5,000. I forget exactly. I don't know if it's a credit or something
So
like
for
that. And
having
what they're
babies,
trying to do is,
yeah, having more children, something like
right?
that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they're trying to incentivize having children. And I understand where they're coming from, what they're trying to do, but what you're essentially doing is turning children into a commodity. You're saying you're looking at children as a material item, because the reason why governments are saying we need more children is because those children will grow up to be utilities to maintain a society.
Exactly.
And that to me, I think is very much so backwards as to what children are, what people are in general. And only something like this can be perpetuated in a very secular society that sees individuals as just things, as just cogs in a machine, and not people with purpose or people with an origination, as being image bearers of God. Like, there is something more to us than I'm Adam the plumber. And so without Adam the plumber, our pipes can't get fixed. So we need more Adam the plumbers to fix pipes. We are more than that. These are just consequences of our existence, but our societies change all the time. And so if there are less people, that means that there's less utility that's needed. And so they're always looking at, if there just make up a number, if there are a billion people and our society functions well with a billion people, then if we go to 800 million people, our society won't function. When the reality is that, I should say, in my belief, the society will adjust to having 800 million people. Just as I'm sure there was one point where they had 500 million people and not a billion people. And guess what? Society relatively functioned relatively well. But I do think that the government needs to do less. The times that they want to help, the times that they want to incentivize, has caused an effect that has been in the long term negative. So often people bring up the welfare system, which on its face I understand. It sounds good, but when you try to use the government to dictate behavior, you often get consequences. You often get outcomes that are the opposite of the intended consequences that you wanted. So while you might want the government to help and give them money, right, in certain circumstances, or to say we care about you, so we have plenty. Here you go, you also create dependency. There's a reason why we don't feed animals in parks, right? Like, it's not just humans, it's animals, right? You take away their need. There's a reason why you can't take a domesticated animal and put them in the wild. They don't know how to hunt. Like, there's a reason why you don't do these things. And when you turn people into dependent cogs in a machine, um, that need to be taken care of because they haven't been taught to do for themselves, or they no longer feel the ambition to do for themselves, then you're causing a negative outcome that didn't exist before. So even with our social safety nets and all these different things, which I do believe that we should have social safety nets but they should be more timed. It should be permanent. You shouldn't be able to work the system, right? And if there are people working the system off of loopholes, fix those loopholes, right? But you should be able to help people before they fall into the safety net as well, right? On a timed basis that they can't manipulate and constantly go over into. I've talked to people who are like, listen, I'm trying, I'm struggling. I just need a little bit of help right now. But in order for me to get help, I got to quit my job and go into extreme poverty to get some sort of help. But then I live in mediocrity. So it's like if there was only some way to get some sort of gap for these people who are in these particular circumstances, that's a different story. But to talk about the government and family, I do think that the government needs to do less. They need to stop thinking they can fix families. They can't. If anything, they can improve messaging about the importance of families. Fine, that's fine. But turning it into policy almost always produces an outcome that they didn't actually want. And in the same way, like right now, we have the Trump administration that sounds family friendly, but then the next administration comes in and may take and do the complete opposite effect. And everyone thinks that, well, this administration did something for families, and this administration needs to keep on that same path. And then every administration, every politician thinks that they need to meddle in our business when they can't. They can't meddle in our business. They can't produce the outcome that they want. So that's why within the book, I don't talk about politics. Anyone can read it. I don't talk about Democrat, Republican, because at the end of the day, when you go lay down with your woman, it didn't matter that there was a Republican or Democrat in office. You laid down with a woman. You made those choices. You decided to do that. And you decided to procreate and bring children into this world.
True, true. Because, like I say on my channel all the time, I think the major issue that we have experienced in America, especially in the Black community, is when these Great Society programs and New Deal programs are implemented, they incentivize men to not be responsible. They incentivize men to leave the home. They incentivize women to be irresponsible and have a lot of different children because you're right, because you get more benefit from the government when you are more dependent upon the government. So it's like a symbiotic kind of relationship. The government wants more and more people dependent upon it. And then these people profit and work the system by being dependent upon the government. So it does not help for the establishment of real families that want to depend upon their own agency and not upon the government. And so, yeah, it has contributed. The government has done too much. I remember Ronald Reagan, I think he said the worst phrase you could hear is, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. The government does not help at all. The government is not here to help. The government is here to help themselves, enlarge themselves, and become more and more dependent and more involved in your life. I mean, that's why you have people trying to have government involved in every aspect. I think one of the worst things that happened was this no fault divorce and these and government getting involved in marriage and those kind of things. It made it easier for people to break up their homes because at a whim. People can just break
Mhm.
up their home at a whim. They don't feel good. I'm not happy, so I'm gonna tear up my home and damage my children. It's just one of the things that's been detrimental. So if we can get those kind of things off the book, off the law book, and really have people understand the value of marriage. And I know as Christians, we speak of marriage from a biblical standpoint. We understand that it was the first institution that God created. Yet we have to be able to explain it to people just from a society standpoint. I mean, marriage is the
Right.
basic building block of a civil society. And if you don't have marriage, if you don't have a nuclear family, your society is not going to be civil for long because you're going to have a lot of people that feel abandoned, a lot of people that don't have any goals in life, a lot of people that don't value life because they didn't feel that they were valued. And so you're starting to see the degradation of society because of the lack of emphasis on strong families. And it's sad. And but people, like we've talked about, people want to politicize it and want to paint one side or the other as a victim or as a villain and not really get to the root cause of what's driving this. So it's good that you took the time to write about it. So I have a couple more questions for you. So
Sure.
how has your experience being abandoned affected you as a parent or even as a husband?
Um,
Um,
well,
well,
my
my
circumstance with
circumstance with
especially having my son, um, obviously there's two ways that you can go if you're a child who's been abandoned. Either you can repeat what was done to you, or you can make a conscious choice to do the opposite of what was done to you, especially because you're motivated because you know how that felt. And you love your child enough where you say, I don't want them to go through what I went through and struggle like I struggled. And that was my circumstance. When my son was born, I said I didn't want to be my father. And so it made me very conscious of being a father, what my role is, although I didn't know how to be a father because I didn't have one to model. So I was essentially trying to figure it out, but I cared enough to try to figure it out. Um, to make small mistakes and correct it, to make certain choices. As far as I talk about within the book, discipline. You know, I was spanked. I never liked it. Um, I like to believe that no child likes getting hit. Although sometimes you talk to certain adults who were hit when they were kids and they romanticize it. But I never liked it. And part of the reason I never liked it is because I already felt bad because I knew I messed up. Like, you're yelling at me. Clearly, I messed up. So hitting me was an unnecessary act. And I think it caused certain consequences as far as maybe being fearful and things of that nature when it came to being hit. So I decided at first, when he was very young, I would pop him, but I never liked it. And I finally, just like I'm advocating within this book, thought about it from a child's perspective. And I thought about me when I was a kid. Did I like that? And like, why am I doing the thing that I hated when I was a kid to my son? And so I just made a conscious choice that I'm not going to hit my son anymore. I didn't tell him. I just said, I'm not going to do it. And when he messes up, I'm going to talk to him even more. Um, and so from a very young age, I just made a choice and I stopped doing it. And when he would mess up, sure, I'd raise my voice, but I never cursed at him. I never cursed around my son, to be honest with you. Uh, my son probably didn't hear me curse until he was in his late teens. Um, so like, I didn't do any of that stuff around him. I always talked to him respectfully, but also talked to him like, I expect more out of you. And I explained, if I yelled at him for something, I explained why I was angry, why he needs to do better, why he needs to step it up. And I would just talk to him. And he was very easy to deal with because I didn't fly off the handle. I didn't grab a belt and just start smacking him or anything like that. I didn't tell him to go get a switch. So, like, these are very, like, if you really break down how a lot of, and I'm just going to say it, how a lot of black kids grow up and how they were disciplined, it sounds very sociopathic as far as the treatment. Go grab the weapon that I'm about to hit you with. It sounds very terrible. um and it's not, to me, it's not funny. It sounds crazy when you think about that, but I didn't want to do that to my son. I said, I love my son, and hitting him is not a sign of love. It's a sign of frustration. And it's an outlet for me because when I did hit him, it was because I was frustrated. But I wasn't expressing love. But teaching him, see, the part we talk about the Bible, discipleship, is to teach. What am I teaching my son by hitting him? I think these things are very important that we have to ask ourselves. By hitting him, is it fixing the problem? Right? If he didn't do his homework, what is hitting him going to do? Well, maybe the reason why he didn't do his homework is because he doesn't know the answers and he feels insecure and he feels like, well, I don't want to act like I don't know because I don't want to appear stupid, or I just want to show that like, there could be a list of reasons why a child hasn't done their homework. Maybe they don't know how to do it. You ever ask that question? Or did you just say, you were supposed to do your homework and you didn't, so I'm just going to hit you, so you next time you'll do your homework? Well, maybe they're struggling. Did you talk to them? Like these are very important things, and I think running to the belt doesn't actually fix the problem of that moment. Making your child comfortable enough to tell you, you know what, I need help, is far greater and far more important, and a sign of love and respect that they have for you, that they feel comfortable enough telling you their insecurity or where they need help at. So to kind of answer your question, I know it was a little bit of a long answer. I didn't want to be my father, and I wanted to raise my son in the way that I thought I would have wanted to be raised. By having someone communicate with me and not screaming at me, not talking down to me, not um, they have a bad day and they're just going to put it onto me because they're wound up tight. I didn't want to do any of that stuff. I just wanted to um, be appropriate with my response to him and teach him. And so for me, to be honest with you, there's a cute baby stage, but I was always looking forward to when he became a teenager. And that's usually like a lot of people are the opposite. They're like, oh, the teenage years are terrible. I was like, no, the teenage years are fine. Like I got to teach him stuff, I got to show him stuff. He got to experience things, his first little girlfriend and the first breakup, and I got to talk to him about it. Like all these different things I was able to provide to him, I didn't have when I was a kid. And so that's ultimately what I was motivated by. I wanted to provide for my son what I didn't have.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's one of the things I've experienced as a father. I kind of enjoy. I mean, both my children are teenagers, and I enjoy the younger stage, and but being able to be that person that they can talk to, can confide in. You are the father. You discipline them in different ways at different stages in their life, and being able to have that person that your children can talk to seek for advice and for counsel and those kind of things, and being there to show them the way, because the Bible talks about how children are like arrows in your quiver, and so you shoot them into the world. So you want to make sure that they're as strong as possible at the appropriate time. I think a lot of people discipline, and they use, and we corrected with the rod of correction, but we did it from a loving standpoint. We weren't angry, we weren't mad, we weren't upset. And a lot of people do that. They get mad and upset, and they abuse their children. It is abuse because they take out their frustration on the children. I remember having to go and get, I didn't have to get it too much, but I remember going and getting the switch, and then you don't get the skinny switch. You got to get the big switch, and those kind of things. And that was kind of done in a way because people didn't know. People didn't know, man. They didn't know how to properly discipline their children. They were dealing with frustration back then, and so people just didn't know how to properly. They didn't know that they were building up a future husband and wife. Somebody's going to be a contributor to society, and so it's good that we're now starting to realize that some of the things that were done to us weren't necessarily the best things. Because I like to think of it like this: a lot of people like to say God chastens those he loves. God doesn't. God is a good God. God doesn't put sickness on you. God doesn't put things on you to teach you a lesson, to harm you. And so that's kind of approach we take. Like, if God loves me, he's not going to put something bad on me to teach me a lesson. And so we shouldn't do that to our children either. We should reflect the same kind of love, that God has for us. So that's good. So let me ask you this question. What allowed you to overcome this abandonment and the challenges that you faced when you were younger? What was it? Because a lot of people go through your experience and end up going off the rails, end up falling off the deep end. What was it that propelled you to overcome and to be able to talk about it in your book?
Um, I think in many ways, in hindsight, I think God. Um, is there, and I kind of detail in the book, there were times when I feel like I didn't see it at that moment, but God intervened and kept me from going down a particular path or making certain choices that I couldn't come back from. Um, so I do give glory to God and thanks for keeping me here. Um, I do think that making mistakes allowed me to learn from those mistakes as well. My life has not been perfect whatsoever. I haven't made the best decisions 100% of the time, just like anybody else. Um, and throughout this entire book writing process, I never try to project myself as I have all the answers and I've done it right the entire time. No, I've made mistakes, but I cared enough to fix those mistakes or to warn people not to repeat what I did. Um, but what kept me from going down those path, don't going down that path, I believe is God. Um, and I would say I think my mother as well in many ways. Maybe not directly, but kind of indirectly. My mother throughout us going through being homeless a couple times and all these different things that happened very early in my life or throughout my most of my childhood. Um, and moving a lot like my mother never ran to the system. My mother was always working hard. She never gave up. She had even to this day, she's a hustler, like in a good way. Um, she's always like selling stuff. She was always selling Mary Kay on the side, working a full time job or working something part time. Like she was always hustling and working really hard, the best that she could. And then in my, I think it was in my early teens or mid teens, she went back to school. She got her master's, and then she started teaching. So like my mother was always trying to improve herself, upgrade her situation, and my mother didn't have the easiest of childhoods either, right? And as I've gotten older, I've become more empathetic to what my mother went through and how she struggled to take care of us and her overcoming these things. I didn't grow up in an environment where giving up was like a thing or trying to scam the system was a thing. Like I started working when I was 15. Like and I've been working since. I just knew that you got if you want stuff you got to work for it. Um Sometimes you got to take risks. You got to do these things. But I get my work ethic I believe from my mother, which is why like I today especially doing stuff on my own, I'm like nonstop. I really care about my work performance. I really care about producing the best product I can, providing the best service I can if I'm doing something service related. Like, I really care about these things because I think work ethic is incredibly important. It's a sign of your character. And these are things that I taught my son, who is 19 now, and works at a restaurant, but he works his butt off, and he's highly respected because of that. He's not lazy, and these are things that you have to teach your kids, and you have to hold them to account and say, I expect you to do these things because it's incredibly important. So, I think giving up just wasn't really outside of suicidal ideation where I had moments of hopelessness, giving up in general and waiting for someone to take care of me or provide for me wasn't really, and it's not to say I never needed help. Like my mother's helped me as an adult. There are times that I was struggling. Even though I was trying really hard, I was struggling and I needed help, just like other people need help. Um, but I never gave up. Like I never said, I'm just going to be a bum and collect unemployment and scam this and do this. Like I was always like, all right, that's the circumstance now. I just need this break. Let me just work really hard to get this break. And I'm glad to go through those moments of struggle because I appreciate where I am today as a happily married man who is not living check to check, who is um, able to see the fruits of his labor, who suffered, but that suffering wasn't in vain. It's come with appreciation. And to pass that on to my son so he understands his father, where his father went from or came from. And so he doesn't take for granted what he has. Like these are things that I'm really proud to have gone through. And also, it's made me less fearful. It took me a while to realize that going through that amount of struggle, which most people don't, and still being here, I'm less afraid than most people are. Um, so yeah, I think I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. You did. You did. And that's great to hear. You never saw yourself as a victim. And that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So Where can people get a copy of the book? And there's anything else you wanted to touch on in the last few moments here about your book, or anything else that you're working on, any other projects that you have upcoming?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
I'm
always
always
working on
working on
stuff.
stuff.
I still
I
write
still
for the
write
New
for the
York
New York
Post
Post
when given
when
the
given the
opportunity,
opportunity,
doing
doing
TV
TV
appearances and
appearances
stuff
and
like
stuff like
that.
that.
Um, right now, I'm just promoting. As far as what's in the book, there's a lot. There's one of the things I was trying to do with the book is allow for it to be something to help heal people. Um, it's not just me talking about the problems, but it's talking about here's how you move forward, here's how you heal, and I have very simple, straightforward solution chapters at the end because I don't like complaining without having some sort of solution in mind. Um, but forgiveness is incredibly important. If you're a child who has been forgotten, um, learn to forgive your parents because the forgiveness is for you. That's how you move forward in life. If you're a parent who's messed up and didn't treat your child the best, um, I believe that with patience and constant effort, you can start a new relationship with your child because I've seen it happen. I think every child wants to have some sort of relationship with their parents, including me. And I detail that within the book. If my father was alive and he was to come to me and say, you know what? I should have done better. I'm sorry. I do love you, and you said the right things. I think with time, I would have allowed for that door to be open and see him and have a different relationship, an adult relationship with my father. Um, because my father never reached out to me, but I never had that feeling like if he called me, I'm not picking up. I never had that feeling. I wanted him to reach out to me. I would have been shocked if he did, but I wanted him to reach out to me, but he didn't. But I forgive my father for that because I don't want that sort of resentment. So when I talk about my father, it's not because of anger, it's not because of that. It's understanding that I accept the circumstance. But I do think that there are a lot of fathers and there are mothers who regret things that they did, how they treated their children, how they should have done more. Maybe they should have stayed with their father, all these different things. And it's affected their relationship with their children. And their child keeps them at arm distance because they don't want to get hurt. I do think that it is possible to reconcile with your kids. And I think the first thing is that you have to, one, acknowledge that you messed up. Two, you have to acknowledge how your screw ups made them feel. And you need to be on their time. So just because you go to them once or twice and you're like, see, they're not being receptive, and then you back off, all you're doing is validating their abandonment. You're validating, see, they don't even care enough to take a couple of pushback from me, right? It's that constant effort that will win them over, that will prove like, oh, maybe they are serious because I've been giving them the business for a year and they are always reaching out and always apologizing, always being accountable. All right, you know what? I will take their phone call. And I've seen it. I've seen it happen. Sincerity and apologizing for your wrongs as a parent can break through that hardened wall that a child has. But I think every adult has that inner child that wants that relationship with their parents. And when the more that you see them like, I don't care, I don't want it, that's that's just them with a hardened wall, right? And you have to figure out a way how to break through it. But you have to break through it with constant effort and on their time when they're comfortable. It may take a week, it may take 5 years, but there will be a point with constant effort that they'll start to lower that wall and they'll start to hear you and start to talk. But you have to make it about them. If you're a parent, and I've talked to some since writing this book and talking about this, I've talked to some parents, and I've said, just give it time, but you have to be consistent, and you have to don't make this about their mom. If you're the dad, if you're the mom, don't make this about their dad. Like make it about where you messed up, and make it about how they feel. And the reason why they have that hardened wall and are pushing back is they want you to hurt just like they are. So you have to give it time. You have to give it patience. And if you're a Christian, I say you pray, pray for guidance, and pray for resilience to deal with that, because it does hurt when someone rejects you, even when your child rejects you back. But just understand all of this is underlying a deep seated pain that everyone is experiencing and no one knows how to fully deal with. And it takes time to break through that. It takes resilience to break through that. So I just wanted to say, like, I do think that this book is a way for people to relate, to find some sort of healing, um, and to give glory to God and understand, especially because I do have my testimony coming to Christ, to understand that if you were abandoned, it doesn't mean that God abandoned you, right? And that was a struggle for me because I thought God was abandoning me just like my father, and it took me decades to come to Christ. I was baptized last year, and make promises to Christ that I'm still upholding to this day, and develop a relationship with Christ. Um, And subsequently, when I watch these testimonies of these people who are coming to Christ, almost every single one of them are coming from a home where there was divorce, abuse, or some sort of neglect. It was a dysfunctional home, and it takes them decades to come back to Christ. So, from a Christian perspective, understand how the type of home that you are building for your child also can dictate their belief in God and their relationship with Christ. Because when that home starts to break apart and they know that you've already talked to them about God existing, they're going to blame God and not Satan. They're going to blame God. If you're so wonderful, why did you let mommy and daddy split apart? Or where's my dad? Where's my mom? Why am I in this foster home if God exists? And they're going to a whole question, and they won't fully understand what is happening to them, and they're going to blame somebody or everybody. Um, So I do think that it's critically important for families to stay together, lower their ego. If you got problems, every marriage has problems. You work things out. Every marriage, every couple that I've talked to that they've been together for multiple decades, some of them, I would say, at least half of them have described that there was a moment where they thought they were going to split apart, and they doubled down and they worked through it, and the relationship got even better than it was originally. So it takes effort, it takes um, humility, it takes God, it takes all of these things to uphold a solid foundation, a solid relationship, and demonstrate what a happy, healthy relationship looks for your child. So it is critically important, and it is critically important for the relationship of your children to Christ.
Great. Well, Adam, I enjoyed the conversation like we had last time. Everyone definitely go get his book, The Children Who Left Behind. They can find it at Amazon and pretty much everywhere, right? Books are sold essentially.
Correct.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate your time. Everyone, get a copy of this book. It's worth the reading, and it will definitely enhance your relationship in terms of if you have an estranged father, if you come from a family that was separated due to divorce, or if you came up in a household where your father wasn't around, even your mother wasn't around. This is a good book to read to help you deal with that and to get through those processes. So thank you, Adam. Appreciate your time once again.
Thank you.